Hello, I'm just going to get us started because there's lots to discuss and hear from. I'm Erica G. I'm just going to introduce this panel, but I'm also a board member for APIAHiP. I have a day job of being staff at National Capacity or National Coalition of Asian Pacific Americans for Community Development. Before I start, I just wanted to ask you to just do this thought exercise. So think about all the things that you need. How do you get those? Do you go to a neighborhood? What is in that neighborhood? What language is spoken? What things are sold? What does it smell like? What is that activity that you see? How do you get there? Where do you park? Or what kind of public transportation? So I think, what we are social beings, and it's essential for us to get our, daily goods, but also to be in community. And oftentimes our neighborhoods are places that provide that. And so these are two organizations that are thinking about a Chinatown, different Chinatowns, but also, the strategies that they're using to make a successful, sustainable Chinatown, which have existed for centuries, may not be the same ones that that are happening today, and that there are new strategies that need to be employed to keep these Chinatowns. So I'm really excited about just the thoughtful study that these folks in New York Chinatown and San Francisco Chinatown have been doing in order to sort of rethink about these places, and also, deploy these new strategies so that we can keep places that residents and visitors and the larger community, that these Chinatowns are thriving. So, and I hope that these strategies are useful for the places that you call home, and that you want to see thrive. So we will first hear from Amy Zhou and Christie Lee from the Chinatown Community Development Center. And they're going to be talking about Tale of Two Corridors, a community-led proposal in San Francisco's Chinatown. So they did a nationwide study, but what does that, to help them looking at Chinatowns across the country, to think about how San Francisco Chinatown will be, how they can re-envision San Francisco Chinatown. And then we're also joined by Jacqueline Wang from Welcome to Chinatown, and Ashley So-Tang and Evan Paik from the H&R Advisors, building intergenerational spaces for legacy businesses and new entrepreneurship in New York City's Chinatown. So great speakers, and all looking at preservation of Chinatown through grassroots and economic strategies.
Thank you, Erica. And also shout out to Erica, who's also a former CCDC alum. Christie, do you want to join me up here? Yeah, so just wanted to say it is so great to be here today amongst friends, community, many folks that we actually met over the course of our travels for the Chinatown Corridor study. I see some of y'all in the audience. So just wanted to introduce us very quickly before we start the presentation. I'm Amy, I'm a senior planner, and this is my coworker, Christie, also co-author, also planner at Chinatown Community Development Center. We're going to tell you a little bit about this very extensive 2-year-long research project that we did. And actually just earlier, was it this week? A lot of things have happened. Earlier this week, we released publicly. So I'm going to give it to Christie to take it away.
The down button. Okay. Perfect. So some background and context. So seeing this map here, you can see that San Francisco Chinatown is actually located within 20 square blocks in the northeast part of the city of San Francisco, and what is widely considered the densest neighborhood west of Manhattan, actually. Another point I do want to mention is that San Francisco Chinatown used to be adjacent to Manila Town, which was a thriving Filipino community on Kearny Street, but that community was eventually displaced during the urban renewal movement of the 60s and 70s. Chinatown has been a very important immigrant gateway for the past 170 years and remains a critical ecosystem for monolingual immigrant households who continue to live in the neighborhood and depend on Chinatown for all aspects of their livelihood, including groceries and healthcare, medical services, community support, etc. And even though many working class Chinese families have moved out of Chinatown, they will still return to the neighborhood to seek services. Okay, a bit of demographic information. So Chinatown is majority, but not entirely composed of Asian non-Hispanic residents, predominantly of Cantonese and Toisanese origin. And in terms of income levels, as of 2022, the area median income of a Chinatown household was barely over 32,000. And if you compare that to the individual income of a San Franciscan, which is over 100K, and this is for individuals, so like not even household. And I'm sure this number is comparable to like Seattle or New York and these other cities that your communities are in. That's a very low number. And likewise, 28% of residents live below the federal poverty line. And these numbers really show that this is a community where anti-displacement tools are truly necessary for its continued preservation. Okay, so where did the corridors come in? Given what I just said about the need for preservation tools, where does the corridor study fit into all this? So there are two main commercial corridors that make up the heart of San Francisco's Chinatown, Grant Avenue and Stockton Street. Stockton Street, as you can see here on the right, is what we consider a resident-centered corridor, meaning that you walk along Stockton and you'll find dry goods stores and wet markets of like fresh produce and other things that residents need for their like day-to-day lives. Meanwhile, on Grant Avenue, you'll see Chinese-themed restaurants with English signage and jewelry stores and gift shops that have little trinkets that say like "I heart SF" on them, clearly meant for tourists passing through the neighborhood. And the corridor study's purpose was to look at these two commercial corridors and determine community-led proposals that would uplift the heritage of Grant Avenue as a tourist-facing corridor, while also continuing to preserve Stockton Street as a resident-centered corridor. So research methodology. So we're going to dive into a bit about the methodology we used for the study, and there were 4 different components that we followed to develop the proposals you can see here. The first of which was a historic document analysis. The second was travel, and this component we considered external facing because that involved visiting other communities to understand what tools they use to preserve their communities. And lastly, we held focus groups and community engagement sessions as the internal facing portions where we dove deep into the lived experiences of residents in the San Francisco Chinatown community. Okay, so a bit of a deeper look at the methodology. We synthesized different types of information, and some of this, like the analysis of historical document, falls within the traditional boundaries of what we consider like historic preservation tools, and others, such as the community engagement, the focus groups, are more community-led approaches to, I think, preservation that we've seen y'all include and incorporate in your work as well. So starting on the left, we began with the information and existing proposals found in past documents and reports written about San Francisco Chinatown. And this was the first layer of information we used to formulate the initial round of proposals. And then as we began our travels to the 5 cities, we kept that information from the documents analysis in mind as we formulated questions for the groups we met up with during the visual analysis of the cities. And as we were writing our summaries for each cities, we kept the themes from our visits in mind and the documents we found in step 1 to come up with another shorter list of proposals and presented that to focus group participants. And during the focus groups, we asked these folks what elements of Chinatown did they feel were the most important to be protected and preserved. We also asked them what did their ideal Chinatown look like in 30 years. And this section was really important for us to highlight the lived experience of focus group members that included small business owners, resident organizers, other tenants, community arts organizations, and other grassroots stakeholders, and understand the experiences of what were most valuable to them in the community. And we used this information to form the bulk of our proposals, but also wanted to talk to other lay people, so residents and visitors passing by on the streets. And we held 8 different community engagement sessions where we randomly surveyed people passing by and asked them about their perception of Grant and Stockton corridors. And now that we had the feedback from these 4 steps that continue to like build upon each other, we generated the complete list of proposals, which I'll talk about it later, but for now you can see that we have these 4 different parts of the proposals, and it was a very layered and iterative process, meaning that each of the steps inform the future step, as you can see on here. Okay, the proposals. So we amassed around 60 or so proposals in total from these 4 different steps, and we're going to share a few of them today in hopes that you'd find them interesting, but also hopefully we can find them applicable to your own communities as well. So the proposals are bringing broader audiences into Chinatown, a nighttime economy, anticipating future challenges, small business preservation, cultural heritage preservation, workforce development, and strengthening and improving infrastructure. So the first one, bringing broader audiences into Chinatown. So maintaining a prominent online presence that directs people towards events in the neighborhood, working with SF Travel to bring larger campaigns into the neighborhood, including ads and airplanes landing at SFO, and having a centralized resource for service providers in the community. And this last one especially is meant to make this idea of like heritage visitation easier and more accessible for all folks coming in the community. Okay, nighttime economy. So having semi-permanent street closures, more youth-friendly programming on the new subway station, and especially youth-friendly and safe places at night, and reoccurring night markets. So this essentially would involve activating the streets after dark and having folks, visitors and residents interact with the built environment of Chinatown in a different night when they're able to explore it at night. Third, anticipating future challenges. So this photo is actually from a mobilization of residents who are taking part in visibility for an affordable housing bond last spring. And this essentially is where we see the importance of building resident power when it comes to historic preservation, as they are using their own voice to preserve their own affordable housing stock. And this is important because it allows residents to prioritize initiatives where their own lives and like well-being are at stake, and that way continue to identify any future hazards that may impact Chinatown. So small business preservation is very closely related to preservation of affordable housing stock, because this allows folks to preserve resident-serving businesses, and not all resident-serving businesses may fall under the traditional category of a legacy business as designated by the like canonical definition in historic preservation, whether that be it being 50 years old or having significant architectural features. But these businesses are important not to be preserved because these are the ones that residents and families visit every day. They offer culturally relevant food and are able to converse with the shop owners in their own language. So cultural heritage preservation, this one was brought up by a lot of focus groups participants and also visitors we surveyed during community engagement, where folks asked for more festivals and more activities for a more vibrant street scene. They asked us to create some sort of interpretation plan to follow a physical path around Chinatown, and also just more signage and more wayfinding in the community as well. Okay, so for workforce development, which is similar to the small business preservation, anticipating future challenges proposals, these are resident-oriented initiatives that continue to ensure the protection of small businesses in Chinatown. And lastly, strengthening and improving infrastructure. So at the heart of Chinatown are its residents and its small businesses, and it was so evident from the focus groups that we conducted that what people wanted to see were things that residents would need, such as an accessible community room for tenants meetings to take place in, more laundromats, because Chinatown currently has only one, and for residents living in SRO units, they're not able to use in-unit, they don't have access to in-unit laundry. And lastly, a consolidated list of service organizations providers, making it more accessible for folks who come into Chinatown for services to know where to find the service they need. Okay, so takeaways. Why are we sharing these proposals? So these are economic development tools, yes, but also economic development tools as a means of anti-displacement and therefore community preservation. And here we see these 3 overlapping circles that introduce the functions of Chinatown as a residential village, as a capital city, and a tourist center. And these 3 functions were actually laid out by the San Francisco Chinatown Master Plan of 1987 and continue to underscore the preservation of the community today. And all the proposals that were previously mentioned fall under one of the categories or one of the functions of Chinatown as a residential village, a capital city, or a tourist center. So the first slide, or the first function, which is residential village, is that Chinatown is a residential home, and we actually have residents living in the community and need to ask ourselves, what do the residents need? And oftentimes it's an affordable housing stock and eviction defense, open space and infrastructure. And infrastructure can include service organizations, people power, and corridor generation. And secondly, Chinatown as a tourist center. So as a tourist center, many of these proposals seek to actually preserve the community by ensuring its vibrancy and draw in visitors who see Chinatown as a hub for cultural experimentation. And this is seen in many of the emerging arts organizations we have in the community today. Okay. And lastly, Chinatown is a capital city. So San Francisco Chinatown has long been a center for advocacy and political organizing. And this last function is especially important as we move into the phase of implementation for these proposals. So we need community power that we can see in, we need community power to bring these proposals into practice. Okay, and now that we have these three mutually supportive functions that provide the social infrastructure, that allows Chinatown to maintain itself as a very vibrant, as a living, breathing immigrant gateway for families that continue to use it as a home for their working class households. And part and parcel with the notion of Chinatown as a site of heritage and history is also the idea that cultural heritage and historic significance is there to serve as a tool for residents to continue thriving there today. Okay, thank you. And if anyone wants to read the report, we have a copy here with us.
Those of you in the back, feel free to come. There's still seats up front. We don't bite if you want to take a seat.
Hi, everyone. The three of us are going to kind of like bounce back and forth between some slides. So I just want to quickly introduce who we are. I'm Jackie. I'm from New York. I'm the COO at Welcome to Chinatown. I'll tell you more about what that means, but we're a pretty young org. So like all of our team of staff and part-timers, we all started as volunteers back in 2020.
And my name is Ashley So-Tang. I'm a director at HR&A Advisors. I'll talk really quickly too about our firm in a second.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ethan Paik. I'm a senior analyst at HR&A Advisors.
Okay, so to start, I just want to ground us in sharing a little bit about what Welcome to Chinatown is. We're a pretty young org, so I don't blame y'all if you've never heard of who we are. Welcome to Chinatown, we're a nonprofit that supports the small businesses in Chinatown and the wider community, but really with a focus of existing and future entrepreneurs. We came about in 2020 as a response to what our co-founders, Jen and Vic here, saw were happening in the neighborhood. Honestly, kind of before like COVID started in New York, but as early as January of 2020. Our org started as a completely failed attempt to get small business owners onto a gift card platform. That's our history. That's kind of what they thought, like, okay, we're seeing this on Instagram. People are doing this to support their favorite restaurants. Like, let's try to get Chinatown businesses to do that. They were basically kicked out of every business they went into. And now in hindsight, we're like, it makes sense. You had these two young women. These business owners don't know who they are, speaking broken Cantonese, asking for financial information and telling them about a sketchy website that they should join. So it didn't work out, but I think it has really anchored the work that we've been doing the past 4 years and our values, which is that one, as a team of like quite young staffers and volunteers and full-time members, we view ourselves as partners to all the people we serve rather than coming in as quote saviors. And we're really there to listen before we deliver. And that's really helped us like grow and adapt all of our programs. Some of our early initiatives were all COVID response, all emergency response. So we built a grant program. We had a meal delivery system. We created a merchandise program. So we would pair like pro bono artists with small business owners, obviously all to like try to get business owners or try to get businesses to like survive and stay above water. But in the last 4 years, like slowly but surely, we've moved away from just emergency response and looking at more like what does sustainable support look like for the neighborhood and how can they just not only survive, but thrive. And we're here to talk about what that evolution looks like, but that could not have been possible without working with Ashley and Ethan here from HR&A. we identified early on that like we know what the problems are in the community because we're like hearing from the business owners, we're on the ground, it's anecdotal, but we really needed some like it's been a long time since like a real impact study was conducted. And so we started there, and that's kind of informed what we've been working on for the past few years. So I'll pass it on to them to talk a little bit about how we've partnered together as two orgs.
Thanks, Jackie. So as I mentioned, my name is Ashley So-Tang. I'm a director at HR&A. First of all, I have to say it's so great to be back in Seattle. I had the opportunity to work on the Pike Place Market Master Plan last year. So Seattle has a special place in my heart. It's so great to be back. A little bit about our firm. HR&A is an employee-owned urban planning and economic development consulting firm. We work across the country and internationally with public, private, and nonprofit organizations of all shapes and sizes, tackling issues from affordable housing to climate resilience to broadband and digital equity and much more. All really with this mission of creating more equitable and vital places that uplifts communities and improves people's lives. And the work that I find most meaningful is when we get to really support communities to define and imagine the futures of these really culturally rich and historically significant places like Pike Place Market, and of course, places that represent people who look like me. So, which is why it's just been an absolute dream to work with Welcome to Chinatown the last couple of years. I'll say the issues and questions that Amy and Christie are tackling in SF are very similar to the ones that we're seeing in New York. And actually, Manhattan's Chinatown went through a very similar planning process in 2022 with the Chinatown Downtown Revitalization Initiative, which was a state program that earmarked $20 million to the neighborhood for catalytic capital projects. HR&A led that public planning process, which ultimately led to 11 projects being selected. And another exciting project that we've had been lucky to support is Gotham Park, which is a complete reimagination and vision for this 9 acres of unused land under the Brooklyn Bridge to turn that into a community public park to serve the Chinatown and neighboring communities who have some of the least access to open public park space in New York City. And so Christie and Amy talked through a lot of different broad strategies. Today, we're really going to zoom in and talk in depth about our work with Welcome to Chinatown, specifically on focusing on small businesses and how protecting and preserving small businesses is so critical to the cultural and historic preservation of Chinatown. We're going to talk through 3 main things today: the impact study that we did, the plans for, and they just launched 2 days ago, ribbon cutting at the Innovation Hub, as well as some strategies on succession planning.
So before we dive into the small business impact study, I want to ground us in why are we talking about businesses today? First, most of the businesses in Chinatown, 92%, have 10 or fewer full-time employees. So most of them are small businesses. Second, a substantial portion of them, 42%, of Chinatown businesses have been in operations for more than 10 years. 22% have been in operations for more than 20 years. So there are a lot of legacy businesses in the area. Shout out to Yin and the Think Chinatown team for their work on the commercial district needs assessment, where this information comes from. She's presenting next in this room, so everyone should go see that panel. But anyways, so like many other Chinatowns, predominantly small and legacy businesses are located in this neighborhood. And they really are essential to the cultural fabric of what Chinatown is. And so the impact study really focuses on what are the challenges that these businesses are facing, and what can we do to make sure that they're around in the long term. And so how did we approach this project? One of our key inputs was robust community engagement. We surveyed over 120 small businesses. And in addition to that, we did multilingual focus groups as well as interviews. And we combined that community engagement and those insights from that engagement with extensive third-party quantitative data. So we looked at economic data on economic trends, business trends, visitation trends. And we took all of those inputs to basically understand, one, what are the key strengths and vulnerabilities that are facing Chinatown small businesses? Two, how did the COVID pandemic have an outsized impact on small businesses in Chinatown? And three, how have they been excluded historically from the economic opportunities and systems that have supported other businesses in New York City? So once we identified those challenges, we basically came up with a roadmap, which told us how are we going to ensure an equitable recovery for small businesses in Chinatown. And that consisted of policy recommendations for the city on what actions the city should take, as well as what actions our partner, Welcome to Chinatown, should take to ensure the survival of these businesses. So there's a lot of data that we crunched and a lot of information that we looked at. But I'd recommend, and I'm not going to cover everything, so I'd recommend you take a look at our impact study. We have a few copies up there. But I did want to highlight two key data points, which sort of tells the story of the challenges that small businesses face in the neighborhood. The first is rising operating costs. So rents increased by 39% between 2010 and 2019. Property taxes increased by 110%. So imagine if you're a small business owner facing these sort of cost increases over 9 years. It's of course going to be really hard to survive. This is consistent with the survey data that we looked at, or the survey that we put out there to small businesses. And that when we asked them about what their largest challenges were, 60% said rent costs, 42% said labor costs. So in addition to rising costs for businesses, we also saw that there was a declining consumer base. So they're having less access to revenue during the pandemic. There are two parts to this. First is that, like many other Chinatowns in the country, Chinatown has been losing Chinese residents. So the Asian population in Chinatown decreased by over 10,000 between 2010 and 2020. And those residents that remain are increasingly older adults, so there aren't really new people who are moving into the neighborhood. In addition to that, visitation decreased by almost 50% between December 2019 and December 2021. And that's really driven by, one, fewer office workers going into work, and also fewer domestic and international visitors coming to the neighborhood. And so in addition to those data points, as I mentioned, we did a lot of community engagement, and these were some of the main challenges that we heard from businesses. So first was staffing and hiring, so being able to find skilled and experienced staff, and also being able to compete with other newer, more modern businesses for workers has been a challenge for legacy businesses in Chinatown. Of course, marketing, branding, and design support. Particularly as it relates to digital technology and technology access. Also, many small businesses are primarily self-funded, and they don't have connections and access to capital and business planning that are available to many other types of businesses out there. So I think there's a gap there in terms of how these businesses can access support. And then, as I mentioned before, commercial space affordability has been a huge challenge in the neighborhood. Small businesses are facing rapidly rising rents, especially relative to the quality of commercial spaces in the neighborhood. So I'm not going to get into all these recommendations. There's a lot more detail, again, in our impact study, so I recommend you look at that. But I wanted to just show this slide quickly to just make the point. So we took these challenges, and basically from that, we identified, okay, there are several roles that Welcome to Chinatown can play in the neighborhood. And they really spoke to the need not only for an organization to step up and start playing some of these roles in terms of small business support, but also really spoke to the need for a physical space where an organization can provide tailored support for small businesses in the neighborhood.
And so beyond having these challenges listed out, I think what working on this impact study helped us do as a young org is really focus and prioritize what we are working on. And some of you might have this feeling of, as an organization, we want to do everything and we want to say yes to everyone and we want to tackle every single challenge there is. But that was not sustainable, especially as we were looking towards the longevity of the community and not just always creating Band-Aid solutions, which are solutions and are great, but that's not really sustainable. And so not only did it help us prioritize projects, it helped us sunset some things that we realized that we were no longer the best group to do so. And there's some other incredible nonprofits and groups in Chinatown that are doing that work. And we can really focus on addressing the things that we work together to figure out that, you know, welcome to Chinatown, this is the role that we can play in the community. And so building a physical space was a big part of that for us. And I think really marked the next phase of our work towards this longevity work. And yes, we had our ribbon cutting on Wednesday. I got to celebrate that and then fly out over here. It's been a fun, exciting, and extremely chaotic journey to get there, but these are some photos from our ribbon cutting on Wednesday. The space itself, it's ground floor in Manhattan, which is huge. It was really hard for us to find. And it really is like putting the onus on us to make sure it's an amazing space for the community, that we have something like this to offer. The space will not only just be a gathering space for our wider community, it will help support legacy business owners, help be a space to incubate new ones, and also just be like an event space for us. And something that we would be able to do is like offer it as a resource to other organizations and groups and individuals to get to use this ground space on Bowery as well. And yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like, but we are open now. So if anyone's visiting New York, please come visit us at our hubs at 115 Bowery.
It is so, so exciting. I think being in the field of like urban planning, these projects take a long time, and it's so amazing to see our recommendations just, you know, turned into action, you know, within months, literally, which is incredible. Just to talk through a little bit about, you know, the process of getting to the opening of the Innovation Hub. We first started with a lot of visioning and goal setting workshops with the Welcome to Chinatown team to really pinpoint, you know, what are the key small business challenges that the hub will address and who will this actually really serve. We conducted a lot of research and interviews with legacy small businesses as well as entrepreneurs to understand, you know, their aspirations and needs. And we also looked at a lot of case studies of other incubators, other small business centers and programs to kind of identify what the right model is for Welcome to Chinatown. And that ultimately informed this programming framework, which I'll discuss on the next slide, which really helps to organize all of the hub's activities in a way that makes sense and aligns with their goals. And then lastly, taking all of those inputs, you know, we know what this is going to look like, what this is going to be about, developed an operating plan and budget for the hub. So looking at staffing requirements, space needs, partnership opportunities. And that really informed also the phasing of the programs and what they needed to do immediately. So in terms of, you know, this was the organizing framework that we ultimately came up with, these 4 pillars that really describe the hub's main functions and Welcome to Chinatown's role. So, you know, them serving as a coach to provide small businesses with mentorship and training, them as a connector to link small businesses to other TA and other customers, other services. How are they going to be investing in small businesses to help them scale funding and venture opportunities, and also continue to innovate and be a space that leverages technology, data, and just continue to be driving innovation in Chinatown. And so now Jackie's going to talk about, you know, how they've turned that into real things.
So having these 4 categories was huge for us, and just honestly like getting organized and all the things that as an org we wanted to do. And we also learned, being able to pilot this a little bit since in the last year or so, is that we now have these rigid pillars, but the programming for a small business doesn't have to be rigid. And there are challenges that everyone faces, but a business, each case that comes to us is going to be very unique. So someone may come to us with like, here are my 1, 2, 3 top challenges, and they can bounce around from different programming. They might come get coached. They need to be connected. And maybe down the line, we can help them invest in a new project. And so what does that look like on our end as the programming we're creating for Coach and Connect? We've been able to hone in on more one-on-one training with small business owners so that it's really results driven rather than just like providing a grant, which is great too, but now we can actually guide them along the way, like how to use those grant funds. We've been able to create like smaller cohorts and larger workshops on, the different challenges that we outlined with HR&A. And then with Connect, we're still working on this, but we're building what we're calling the Chinatown white pages, which is basically like vetted, mostly API service providers, freelancers, creatives, on a list that small businesses come to use, or even corporates, right? We have a lot of corporate partners that come to us. They're like, hey, I need to hire like a minority owned business for this event. Do you know? Like, yes, we do. Use our list and we can get them new business. And then Invest and Innovate's farther down the line, a little bit more long term, but things we're looking at here are potentially building out a community governed fund. What does it look like to have a community token, perhaps, to keep wealth and money within the community? And then for real estate and for rent, what does it look like for us to be able to support, whether it's through subsidies or just having a physical space a little bit more attainable for small business owners. And luckily, or not, kind of luckily, but we were forced to have a pilot period because we got our keys to the space. We found a space, we could not turn it down, but we hadn't raised all the funds for the renovation. So we were kind of forced to just get creative and putting up some pretty paint and putting up some shelves. Our head of creative got really creative in masking the space itself. And so we got our keys to the space actually July of last year, realized we cannot sit on this space and just have it waiting to make it beautiful. And like, we just made it work to get small business owners in our community in there as soon as possible. And so what did that look like to be able to pilot some of the programming ideas we had? We were able to test out some community building ideas through different family meals. Sometimes we would have a family meal around a specific theme and bring in people that cared about that. We were also able to have like kind of almost like investor meals where we brought in funders who are interested in funding like API projects. And then we had entrepreneurs and small business owners come and kind of be able to do like an informal pitch, but with less pressure. We were able to support budding entrepreneurs and on the topic of like incubating new businesses through test and learns. We had like chefs who maybe haven't been able to open up their own restaurant, but come and do a little test run in our space. We do not have kitchens, so they use hot plates. And we were able to do larger events, like having a vendor fair so that creatives and entrepreneurs within the community could come and sell their things and share their story. We were able to house a lot of the one-on-one small business support. And I would say this is where we really saw the importance of having a physical space. I don't think you can see, but this photo here is work we were doing with a local beauty salon, Karina. We were helping her build a website, which also included building her brand book and print assets and all the things involved in that. No matter how many times we would like call her, text her, email her son, the only way that she wanted to reschedule meetings is by knocking on our door and saying, I'm not coming later, I'm gonna come tomorrow. And so we were like, okay, physical space, important. And it just being able to like have a home base, a space outside of the business owner's usual place of business is, I think, huge for them to be able to think bigger and outside the box and like, think about all the possibilities that we could help them and work with them on. And also public events. That was the last thing that we did a lot of testing on is like, it is small business focused from like pitch panels to like pop-up dinners with, again, these chefs who are kind of wanting to do these things, but maybe can't afford to rent their own space. And we are also there to kind of be both hands-on support or just like a safety net so they can try these things out. I think that was huge for us. Event space rental is like pretty expensive in Manhattan, and be able to subsidize that for some of our community members was really exciting. And so now that the space is open, we're so excited to actually do this programming. But I think what I want to call out here is that the space, can I have the laser pointer actually? So the space itself is designed to be extremely flexible and grow with the growing and changing needs of the community. And so this is a rendering of what it's supposed to look like. It like mostly looks like that now. We're getting very close. Here we go. These carts here, these are custom made by our architect, Justin Ang. They can become a stage. They can become a vendor cart. They can become a desk. They can roll out onto the sidewalk. I don't know if they're like sturdy enough, but they technically could. All with the purpose of building a space that can serve so many groups of people and demographics and needs. Our goal is that you may come for an event on a Monday, and then maybe you come to a dinner on Friday, and it's like a totally different space. We can do that with these cards. We can also do that with this curtain that can like transform the space, but all it literally is a piece of cloth. And then the back of the space here is a little bit more of like your traditional hub. It's got meeting rooms, it's got phone booths, and whether you come co-work in the space or you're a business owner that just needs to take a meeting, like we want this to be a space for you. And so we're excited that it's open. We're excited to be able to like really formalize our programming, but we're also excited about like what the future holds for this space, because like we have some ideas, but that might honestly change, and the space will allow us to do that, which I think I will somehow figure out a way to share the name of our architect. He's incredible. He did a lot of work on like the architecture of dim sum parlors. So this like the flexibility, the beautiful chaos, like it's kind of reflected in the design. Could we pause this video quickly? Amazing. Last thing, and then we can move on to questions. But I did want to highlight one of the programs that we're working on, which is one of the key challenges that we found through HR&A, which is succession planning. And I think this is very relevant to the work that we're all talking about here this weekend. We, probably in a lot of communities and ethnic enclaves, are on the precipice of losing potentially a lot of iconic businesses as we see aging business owners, often with like no succession plan or honestly like no interest in having a succession plan. And we had a lot of business owners who are like, I would continue it, but my kids don't want to take over. And so a lot of places that we all love that I think make up the fabric of Manhattan Chinatown, we're at the risk of losing. And we are, like, to be totally transparent, still figuring out what our work looks like here. And we've been working with HR&A as well on an engagement in building out what our support from like a roadmap and decision-making tree framework looks like. But obviously each case is so different. Like this is such a heady topic. It's very personal for these business owners. And so I will play this video just to introduce Tings. I will say this video was shot 2 years ago before we knew they were planning to retire. They closed their shop a few months ago. So we'll share a little bit about, we'll let the video play so you can meet them. I'll tell you a little about what we did to help them with that transition. And I think this is an awesome place also to hear more from y'all if this is something that your communities are facing. You can play the video now. Has anyone been to Tings? I don't know if anyone here has visited. It's a very iconic corner. Yeah, Yin. And so even before learning about their retirement plans, we have been working with Eleanor, who is the main owner and operator of the store for about 4 years since we started. And I would say they're one of the businesses that have been very cautious, and it's taken a long time to build the trust with them. And I don't think if we hadn't worked with them for those 4 years, they would have even come to us in getting support on their transition period. And so when we found out that this was happening, we didn't know what our succession plan support looked like, but we just kind of banded with them to react to what was happening and see where we could support. It was also like a very emotional process too. So we didn't want to be very pushy. We jumped in where Eleanor was comfortable. So for us, that looked like helping them with their inventory. Took us a long time for Eleanor to allow us into her basement. I think she needed to process that, and also she needed to clean up. But we went down, we like went through all the stuff that was still left in their inventory, physically trying to like count what was there, and then helping digitize that so that we could onboard it onto an e-commerce platform. Because it's not the end of Tings as Tings, it's just the end of Tings as the physical storefront. And they're very interested in what e-commerce could look like. And so we're training on all the things that we need to do to get there. Onboarding them onto the e-commerce platform, showing them digital payments. I think one of our pop-ups with them was the first time they took credit card payments. And that's going to be something that's necessary for this new era of Tings. And lastly, with our physical space, we were able to offer up just for them to use as a pop-up, one, to like actually move their inventory, but two, so that they could get some training and practice in what that looks like, so they can continue to do so. And so our work with Tings was, you know, used as an example as we worked with HR&A to develop this out. Stay tuned. We're still seeing how we can support businesses like this. I think it's going to be a long project. But yeah, I think this is really important in the fabric of Chinatown and making sure that even if small businesses aren't exactly how they were 60 years ago, that whatever this future of it looks like it's, you know, the Chinatown we know for generations to come. Sorry, I took a little bit too much time, but thank you all for listening. I guess we'll do questions now. Yeah.
Thank you. That was a really, really inspiring presentation. I have a question when you're talking about how you're implementing succession planning for Ting's Gift Shop. Did you run across restaurants that were struggling to, like old mom and pop restaurants? Can you talk about that experience? I'm from 1882 Foundation, DC Chinatown. So we're very interested in how to revitalize Chinatown, especially given that there's a sports arena in our neighborhood.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would say it's like every type of business is facing this in Chinatown. With restaurants, it's particularly interesting in the like culinary sense of things as well, because it's not just like succession of the businesses, but it's like succession of the recipes and the traditions of which this food is cooked in. If you go to like a really iconic Cantonese spot like APIAHiP, not only are like the owners are older, the team there, like the servers, both of my co-founders have been living in Chinatown for a long time. One of them grew up there. She's like, these are the same servers from when I was little. And they're amazing, but they're like 70. And the team in the kitchen as well. And I think even if you look at like culinary programs all around the world, honestly, like there isn't a lot of focus on this type of cooking. And so I think the restaurant side is like extra complicated because not only is like we need a succession plan, it's like who's going to take over, who are we going to pass these recipes down to, like who's going to continue the legacy of these dishes. There are some interesting, and I'll let them speak about this as well because we did a lot of like interviews with businesses going through this and also looked at some examples happening as well, including Friends of Little Saigon here in Seattle. Got to speak to Andy because I know they're doing similar work. There are some like really iconic non-Chinatown New York food establishments that have their succession plan. They have like kind of quietly passed it on to someone else, but you wouldn't know because they kept the integrity of the restaurant. I don't know if there are any New Yorkers in the crowd. There's this like amazing deli in Flatiron called S&P. It's like a luncheonette. It's very like 60s looking feeling inside. It looks the way I think it's looked for a while. And I learned this year that it was taken over by Court Street Grocers, this like very hip sandwich shop in the East Village in Brooklyn. They're the owners and operators, but they like kept it to the integrity. So I think that on the topic of restaurants, I think it's very interesting, especially if you're like fascinated in the food culture of it all. And so in our work and looking at what succession planning looks for restaurants, we've even looked at like what culinary programs look like because there's that added element. Does that answer your question? Okay, I'll let them speak about that.
Yeah, I was just also going to say that there are a lot of young chefs that are also, you know, trying to look for space in Chinatown, trying to, you know, come up with new restaurant concepts in Chinatown, and maybe you could talk about, you know, the partnerships between the cart, the Trung Fun cart, and Golden. No, I'm forgetting the name now, but sorry. Oh yeah, Potluck Club, and you know, it's a really interesting example of how you can do intergenerational collaboration, where you can have a young aspiring chef work with old chefs, old timers, you know, old restaurants, and have that, you know, communication and pass down that kind of like knowledge.
I'll share this story quickly because I think it's a really like beautiful one. There's a cart in Chinatown. It's been there for decades. It's a rice roll cart. The owner's name is May. She's been on that corner every day for like decades. Most of us found out through social media that she was planning to retire. And there was this Instagram account called Righteous Eats who like created a very viral TikTok video. It was like, May's last day is Thursday. Let's give her flowers. lines, like weaving through blocks of Manhattan for days. And when the owners of Potluck Club, a newer restaurant in Chinatown, opened up by a group of young people that grew up in the community and are like doing Cantonese cooking with like a fun spin, but honoring the legacy. Whole different topic. Definitely check them out. When they found out about this, their chef actually spoke to May, was like, would you let me continue the legacy of your cart? And obviously there's like a lot of conversation that needs to happen there. But the TLDR is that she agreed to teach him how to do what she does, with the potential that Potluck Club would continue this cart for her. But that part of the agreement is that they need to be operating it 50% of how she was doing it. So you need to be on this corner. You need to be serving the community the way that I was. And then on the weekend, if you want to have Nike pop up and do all these things, amazing. Like that is, she's excited about that opportunity, but that you're continuing to like the legacy. So I'm sure there are other examples out there of this kind of work, but I love that Ashley brought this. This is like the happy, positive part of succession planning, is that there are a lot of people who care a lot and like want to continue this, especially the like younger API chefs, which I'm sure definitely in New York and in the cities that y'all are from too.
Thanks for all the work that you all do. It sounds amazing. But my question was about kind of municipal tools that have been geared towards preservation, like legacy business programs that you all mentioned, cultural districting, historic districting, and if that was in any way effective to preserving the historic and cultural significance in your respective Chinatowns, or if it was maybe even an obstacle or barrier that you had to work through.
I'm trying to think about like how to, I feel like there's so many layers, I think, to that question. And I think there's a lot of people in the room as well who've done this type of work, especially even in San Francisco. I think there are a lot of, in San Francisco, there is both like the legacy business program, also cultural heritage, the cultural districts. And actually San Francisco's Chinatown is not a cultural district, not because folks haven't thought that it's like culturally relevant or culturally important, but because I think a lot of the folks, there are other folks here who have different opinions as well, but I think a lot of the folks who spoke up against it didn't think that it was necessarily necessary for the community, and were worried that it would actually bring up some barriers, especially for landlords or for folks who own buildings, to actually like adjusting or making any kind of adjustments to the buildings there. And I think it really, when we did our travel component for the quarter study, we talked to Vancouver, Chicago, Philadelphia, New York City, and Boston. And it was interesting to see how cultural heritage was used as a tool to try to keep their Chinatowns going and try to keep them strong. And what we actually specifically saw in Vancouver was their use of trying to turn their Chinatown into a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And when we had conversations with folks there, it really was kind of like a tool of last resort, because a lot of the other tools that I think maybe we're a little bit more fortunate to have in San Francisco and some of the other Chinatowns weren't necessarily quite there in Vancouver. And in addition, in San Francisco's Chinatown, like show of hands, who's been to San Francisco's Chinatown? I think quite a few people. When you go there, there are still a lot of people there, still so many people who live in the community. And there's still quite a strong, it still holds quite a lot of power in San Francisco as well. And by the way, all this is to say is there's still quite a few residents who are living in SF's Chinatown, but in Vancouver, there's very few residents who are actually still living there. And so for them, it really became this tool that they would use to try to keep their Chinatown going. And I think, just speaking to San Francisco, there is still like the business program, and there are some legacy businesses as well in San Francisco as well. And I think they're all kind of used as like a holistic toolbox of things to really prevent that displacement and gentrification in the community.
I think the main issue here is you want to avoid being stuck in a moment in time. We want to make sure that Chinatowns continue, you're providing that support for small businesses and the legacy and history and stories to continue to evolve over time. So I think that's something I think that you kind of have to balance when you're looking to either landmark or go through a cultural district. But I think there are a lot of good programs that are working to support, like all of the work that Welcome to Chinatown is doing. But the city has, I know New York City has like a storefront activation program that they're just testing out. So really thinking about how to maintain a lot of the vibrancy along all of these retail corridors. I know there's a lot of other like small business like support program through small business services. So I think those types of programs, I think through the Chinatown DRI project, one of the projects was to create a fund to help maintain, to allow building owners access to funds to maintain a lot of the buildings in Chinatown, because a lot of them are old and need a lot of repair. So I think those types of programs are maybe more concrete and able to actually tackle a lot of the immediate issues that a lot of these that Chinatowns are facing.
Yeah, I would also add that cities really need to work closely with their community-based organization counterparts, because I think we've seen like a lot of, like we looked at several legacy business programs. We spoke to some of the folks at the city of San Francisco, and I think what happens is that like a lot of these are general programs, so they apply to like all businesses throughout the city, whereas we found particularly in Manhattan's Chinatown that a lot of the businesses face very distinct challenges. So I think the city, like in addition to just being like having a program, like needs to invest more in how do we ensure that we're giving culturally competent support. Obviously the language barrier, technology access, as we mentioned, are big issues. So I think being able to provide more targeted, tailored support is something that I think we still see a gap in, at least in New York City.
I just wanted to add one more thing, that at the end of our presentation, we had the few slides that was like the residential village and the capital city, and what was the third one? The tourist center. And I think a lot of folks here have been to San Francisco's Chinatown, and they've seen that a lot of tourists are also there. Our new office is actually on Grant Avenue, and so we see so many people coming in from out of town, hanging out, shopping. And I think the most important thing that we wanted to accomplish with this study, and I think the work of the org that we both work for and so many of the other organizations in the community, is that we do not want for it to become just a tourist center, just a place for tourists to come to. There are still people who live here. There's still businesses who live here. And we want to make sure we want all of those tools to be extremely present, that affordable housing, that people are not being displaced. And I think like the core is, it is really great for us to have that cultural heritage, all these like cultural heritage tools, these legacy business tools, and thinking of those as tools, and then also focusing very specifically on making sure people are still housed, and that this is still a community with residents who are living here first and foremost.
Hi, Amy. I'm glad this is actually what I wanted to ask about. I was curious if you could talk about CCDC and its work with the city through things like the Small Sites program or San Francisco's version of RAD, where the residents you just mentioned that are still there, the long-term residents, it's because the city actually, you worked with the city and you pushed the city to work with you to keep them there. And are there ways that you actually measure the impact or kind of actually try to capture some of the impact to the small businesses on the corridors to kind of say like definitively, like you're still here as a business because your customers and residents and your clients are literally in the neighborhood still, and capture that spending as a data point. The local spending versus tourist spending, and capturing all of it and being able to say that the local businesses are here and have customers from the neighborhood who live in these buildings that we've helped preserve.
And also looking forward to your book on community banking that's coming out soon.
Thanks.
Shout out. I think that something else that we also really wanted to emphasize in this report as well is how much all of the residents and the small businesses really feed into each other. A lot of the people who are working in Chinatown are also residents of Chinatown as well. And even though our extensive list of 60+ proposals included things like, workforce development and also supporting the small businesses and having the small business counselings, the fact of the matter is a lot of that is already happening without the help of these like community-based organizations like Chinatown Community Development Center. A lot of them already have, there's already a lot of like internal systems of just folks who are still there who might be working at the restaurants in Chinatown, and then they'll have folks come in, they'll work at some of the restaurants that are there and then start their own restaurants. And they do that without necessarily any of the support from the small businesses. And I think, our ED Malcolm has talked about COVID as like an existential moment for Chinatown. And yet I think we can still see how resilient this community is, because we can still see that a lot of these things are happening without the hands of a lot of the CBOs and the nonprofit organizations that are here. The small sites program, and I guess like we didn't mention this as well, but Chinatown Community Development Center is also, maybe you might have guessed from some of the things I was saying before about affordable housing, but is also an affordable housing developer and has a portfolio of almost 40 buildings, houses, I think 3,000 to 4,000 people, not just in Chinatown, but also in other communities in San Francisco as well. And actually, we did the research a few years ago where actually CCDC owns the greatest number of rental units in Chinatown. And that's because we also own the Pingyuans, which is like a very large public housing facilities that are in San Francisco's Chinatown as well. Yesterday, I wasn't here at APIAHiP yesterday because I was at the California CLT conference, Community Land Trust conference that was in LA, because I'm also on the board of the LA Chinatown Community Land Trust. And while we were there, a lot of folks have asked me like, oh, your paid job is with San Francisco, but you're also part of the Los Angeles stuff. Like, what have you been learning? And the fact of the matter is, like in Los Angeles' Chinatown, there's a lot of gentrification, displacement happening, but there's also no social infrastructure in the way that there is in San Francisco. There are no affordable houses quite in the same way. And folks in the history of CCDC in particular, the organizations that eventually became CCDC have been in the community for decades. We're in the basement of the International Hotel, and really it was like the founders, all the folks who came together during the 80s, during like the ethnic studies movements, they had the foresight to be like, wow, we gotta actually think about this master plan. We gotta think about all the housing that we gotta keep for the folks who are still here and may potentially be gentrified in the future, because SF's Chinatown actually is very close to the financial district and to Nob Hill, both of which are very wealthy communities, and is situated on land that is extremely now, what's the word I'm looking for? Expensive. Yes, valuable and expensive. And yeah. And so I think like it really is, a lot of it is due to the foresight of a lot of the folks who came before us who were like, we need to think about the housing. We need to make sure people are able to stay here and are not displaced or gentrified out.
All right, we're at time. And, but I want to say that all this work has been like thoughtful dedication, doing community research, active listening to community, and also really like sort of thinking outside the box and what can you do with that community listening session to like think about new strategies and to get excited about our neighborhood, all the intangible cultural assets like a rice roll cart, that, brings joy to people's life, and how do we continue to preserve that energy and these cultural assets in our neighborhoods. So thank you all speakers for all your wonderful insights and your hard work that you're continuing to do in your neighborhoods.
We printed a lot of these summaries of our impact study, so feel free to grab one, take one home if you want to learn more. So they're up here, and I think maybe in the back as well. Thank you.